At our weekly family dinner, I casually said, "Can't wait for Saturday's cookout," not realizing my sister would turn a simple comment into an unforgettable chain of bizarre, hilarious, and completely unbelievable stories that would leave us laughing, bewildered, and questioning reality itself. Best Reddit-inspired family story ever told. It was one of those crisp autumn evenings where the kind of cold that nipped at your skin was softened by the warmth of home and the aroma of food wafting from the kitchen. Every Thursday, like clockwork, our family gathered around the slightly wobbly oak table that had been passed down for generations. The scent of roasted garlic, onions, fresh herbs, and something bubbling gently in a heavy pot filled the house with comfort, making even the most ordinary Thursday feel extraordinary. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a particular kind of excitement in my chest. "Can't wait for Saturday's cookout," I said casually, letting the words fall into the air, almost as an afterthought. But the instant they left my mouth, I noticed my sister freeze mid-bite. That moment of hesitation, subtle as it was, sent a ripple of anticipation through me. Maya, my older sister by 3 years, had always possessed a rare talent. She could make ordinary moments unforgettable. She set her fork down with deliberate precision, and I knew immediately that her next words would pull me into a story that I would remember long after dinner. "Oh," she said, tilting her head and flashing that mischievous smile she reserved for the moments she intended to ensnare someone in a tale. "You're excited for a cookout, are you?" I tried to play it cool. "What's that supposed to mean?" My curiosity had always been my weakness, and with Maya, I was defenseless. "You remember last summer, don't you?" she asked, lowering her voice into that conspiratorial tone she always used when recounting her favorite strange Reddit stories. "The one you laughed about for days?" I raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" "The cookout story," she replied, her grin widening. "The one where things got bizarre." And so it began. Maya spun a tale so rich and absurdly detailed that it could have come straight from Reddit's strangest corners. She described a small town that hosted an annual barbecue competition, where ordinary events twisted into chaos in ways that defied logic. Steaks would mysteriously disappear, a neighbor's dog would somehow understand the competition rules better than the humans, and cryptic signs would pop up around the park with messages nobody could read properly. She painted every detail with painstaking care, the dew glistening on the grass, the aroma of smoke mingling with barbecue sauce, the sun gleaming off aluminum trays. By the midpoint, I was laughing so hard I could barely breathe. Her timing, her mimicry of voices, her exaggerated gestures, it was as if I were present in that small, chaotic park, dodging runaway bratwursts while participants scrambled in hilarious panic. Then, as always, Maya took a turn. Just when I thought I knew the rhythm of the story, she dropped the twist. "And that's when it got really strange," she said, leaning forward. "A stranger appeared. Everyone ignored him at first, but he claimed he had to warn us about something terrible." Her eyes gleamed. "And then the smoke, it started moving differently. Shapes emerged. Unexplainable patterns no one could decipher." I froze. Even in the cozy comfort of our kitchen, a shiver ran down my spine. She had the uncanny ability to make fiction feel tangible, real, almost alive. After dessert, she sprawled across the couch, her hands behind her head. "Want to hear another one? This one's my favorite," she said, eyes sparkling with mischief. She launched into a tale about a haunted food truck that had appeared overnight, in a quiet suburb. At first, people assumed it was a viral marketing stunt, drawn by the lure of bizarre snacks, deep-fried pickles wrapped in cotton candy, bacon-wrapped ice cream cones, and other grotesque inventions. But soon, inexplicable phenomena began to occur, whispers from the steam of the fryer, reflections of people who weren't there, recipes appearing on slips of paper in the dead of night. She described every reaction in vivid detail, the confusion, the delight, and the creeping fear that perhaps the food truck was sentient, guided by forces beyond comprehension. "What happened to it?" I asked, leaning forward eagerly. Maya grinned. "Nobody knows. One morning, it just disappeared. No tires, no trace. People say it reappears in other towns, leaving out recipes behind. Some call it cursed, others magical. I just find it hilarious." The laughter faded into awe as she continued. She told of a cat who secretly ran a midnight diner for insomniacs, mischievous gnomes that rearranged themselves in gardens every night, and a neighbor whose barbecue sauce seemed to predict the weather. Each story was absurd, yet she narrated them with a conviction that made them feel real, tangible. I felt transported to each scene, walking the streets of fictional towns, inhaling the scents, hearing the chaos, feeling the tension. Hours passed, but time seemed to dissolve under the spell of her storytelling. She wove layer after layer, a runaway bratwurst that led to a small-town mystery, a haunted pie contest, and even a barbecue judge who had an uncanny ability to foresee minor disasters. I found myself laughing, groaning, and marveling all at once, caught in the cadence of her words. Eventually, the night deepened. I realized that these dinners were never really about food or routine, they were about stories. Maya could transform the simplest remark into a gateway to adventure, humor, and wonder. That night, I went to bed thinking not about the upcoming cookout, but about the infinite possibilities it represented: chaos, mischief, laughter, and the strange magic lurking in ordinary moments. Even as sleep took me, echoes of her tales lingered, the sizzle of the haunted food truck, the quiet shuffle of mischievous gnomes, whispers of recipes that predicted storms. Life itself felt like a story, waiting for someone like Maya to bring it to life. The next Thursday arrived in the usual blur of golden sunlight filtering through the kitchen windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the warm beams. By the time we gathered around the table, the smell of roasted vegetables, sizzling meat, and freshly baked bread wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. Maya was already there, tapping her fingers lightly on the table in a rhythm that somehow suggested she was plotting something. "Did you dream about Saturday's cookout?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I might have," I admitted cautiously, remembering how last week's tales had haunted my imagination, making sleep feel like another kind of adventure. "Why?" "Because I had a dream too," she said, leaning forward as if sharing a secret with the universe. "And it's kind of connected to last week's stories." I raised an eyebrow. Somehow, that was the understatement of the century. Maya launched into her story. It began with a quiet town preparing for its annual barbecue festival, the kind that promised sunny skies, competitive grilling, and chaos hiding behind every smiling face. She described a judge, a man with a peculiar obsession with spices, who had discovered a new kind of paprika that seemed almost magical. "It's the kind that changes the way you see the world," she said, wagging a finger with an impish grin. "And everyone who tasted the first batch experienced, well, let's say they saw things differently." I leaned in, half laughing, half horrified. She continued, weaving details that were ridiculous yet vivid: a dog that acted as a scout, warning its owner whenever a rival chef approached, a rival team who somehow learned to manipulate the smoke rising from their grills to form ominous messages in the sky, and townspeople who mysteriously disappeared only to reappear with perfect, secret barbecue recipes etched into their memory. "It's as if the barbecue itself has a consciousness," she whispered. Her storytelling had a rhythm that made it impossible to stop listening. By the time she described a runaway bratwurst rolling through the festival like a mischievous little villain, narrowly avoiding an enraged mayor and a confused marching band, I was laughing so hard tears rolled down my cheeks. But before I could recover, she shifted the story into something darker, something that made my chest tighten slightly. "A stranger arrived at the festival," she said, lowering her voice. "Tall, silent, carrying a basket of, well, I don't know what it was. But everyone who took even a single bite changed. And no one could figure out why." I shivered involuntarily, caught between laughter and a strange sense of suspense. She had the uncanny ability to make absurdity feel real, to pull you into her tales so completely that even the kitchen, bathed in golden light and the smell of roasted garlic, felt like the edge of some strange new world. As the night wore on, she layered story upon story, each more bizarre than the last. A cat ran a clandestine cafe for night shift workers. Gnomes rearranged themselves nightly in gardens in patterns that seemed to convey secret messages, and a neighbor discovered that their barbecue sauce predicted the weather with unnerving accuracy. Each tale carried the familiar mix of humor, suspense, and a touch of magic that made it feel alive. And then she paused, leaning back, eyes glinting. "You see," she said, "that's why Saturday's cookout is going to be interesting." "What do you mean?" I asked, my pulse quickening in anticipation. "Because," she whispered, "you never know what's real and what's not." For the rest of the evening, the stories shifted between reality and imagination so seamlessly that I wasn't entirely sure where one ended and the other began. The mundane events of our family dinner, the clatter of forks, the murmur of my parents' voices, the warm glow of the lamps, blended into fantastical tales of barbecue mishaps, ghostly whispers, and mysterious strangers, until the ordinary world felt like just another stage for Maya's stories. By the time I went to bed that night, the stories were still echoing in my mind. I imagined the strange festival, the magical paprika, the mischievous bratwurst, and the mysterious stranger who changed everything with a single bite. Sleep came, but it was vivid, a tapestry woven with laughter, suspense, and the strange thrill of unpredictability. The following days passed in a blur of preparation for the cookout. Every trip to the store, every step in the kitchen, felt imbued with possibility. Would a runaway bratwurst appear? Would a mysterious stranger arrive with a basket of magical food? Would the gnomes in the garden communicate some secret message? Saturday dawned bright and golden, with the smell of sizzling meat and fresh bread filling the air. The backyard was alive with family and friends, the laughter of children mingling with the scent of barbecue sauce and roasting corn. I glanced at Maya, whose eyes sparkled with the same mischievous glint they always did before she told a story. As we worked the grills and set the tables, her tales unfolded around me like invisible threads. Some guests laughed at her wild, impossible stories, others grew curious, imagining the absurd events she described playing out in the bright sunlight. And though it was just another cookout on the surface, I knew, thanks to Maya, that it would be remembered as something extraordinary, an intersection of humor, mystery, and the unspoken magic of storytelling. Even as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt the thrill of anticipation for the next story, the next twist, the next strange, hilarious, and utterly unforgettable tale my sister would spin. Because with Maya, the ordinary was never ordinary. The mundane became magical, and every family dinner held the promise of adventure, laughter, and memories that would linger long after the plates were cleared and the last ember of the barbecue died. By mid-morning, the backyard was buzzing with energy. The smell of smoked meats mixed with freshly cut grass, and the faint hum of bees added a kind of natural music to the scene. Friends and neighbors were arriving, carrying trays of sides and desserts, laughing and exchanging greetings. Maya, of course, had already taken command of the storyscape. She wandered from group to group, whispering impossible tales with the utmost seriousness, watching each listener's eyes widen in disbelief or amusement. One of her first stories involved a rival grill team, led by a man named Marvin, whose obsession with secret barbecue rubs was legendary. According to Maya, Marvin had once tried to bribe a judge with a bottle of chili sauce infused with an ingredient so secret that anyone who tasted it could not stop talking for 3 hours. Some said it made people spill their deepest secrets. Others claimed it temporarily revealed hidden talents, like speaking backwards or juggling knives with their eyes closed. Naturally, everyone at the cookout was on high alert, scanning the crowd for Marvin, though he had never shown up in reality. I watched Maya weave the tale effortlessly, her hands animated, her voice fluctuating from a conspiratorial whisper to the loud exclamations of the festival crowd. "And then," she said, "the bratwurst, you remember last year's bratwurst? It escaped again. Rolled straight toward the mayor, bounced off a cooler, and landed right in the prize booth. No one knew whether to laugh or cry, but the judges simply stared, frozen in disbelief. I laughed until my stomach hurt, imagining the absurdity in vivid detail. The real bratwurst on my plate suddenly seemed mundane in comparison, yet somehow, it tasted better, infused with the magic of her storytelling. She didn't stop there. A cat appeared, or so she claimed, in her story, wearing a tiny apron, serving midnight snacks to exhausted grillers. Each slice of pie it offered had a strange property. One bite might make someone remember a forgotten childhood memory, while another could cause uncontrollable laughter for exactly 7 minutes and 32 seconds. I caught myself glancing at the yard, half expecting a feline waiter to appear among the guests. The afternoon wore on, and the stories became more intricate. Maya introduced a subplot involving a small group of children who had discovered a secret recipe book buried under the oldest oak tree in the park. This book, she explained with great gravity, could only be read by those who believed in magic, and each recipe produced outcomes that were never what the cook expected. Chocolate chip cookies might float midair, potato salad might sing a lullaby, and lemonade might temporarily change color based on the mood of the drinker. "Careful with that salad," she whispered to me conspiratorially, nodding toward the table. "It might decide to walk itself over to the dessert table." I rolled my eyes, smiling, though a small part of me still wondered if she was right. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the stories gained momentum. Guests began to play along, their laughter blending with Maya's narration. Someone tripped over a garden hose, and Maya immediately spun it into part of the story. The hose was enchanted, she claimed, capable of turning ordinary water into a temporary invisibility potion for anyone brave enough to touch it. Children screamed in delight, running in zigzag patterns as if the hose really held that power. I couldn't help but marvel at her skill. She could transform a simple backyard cookout into a sprawling, absurd, magical universe in which anything was possible. Every glance, every small movement became part of the story. A cloud of smoke from the grill became a dragon's breath. A passing dog became a wandering wizard searching for his lost wand. Even the neighbor's old lawn gnome was suddenly imbued with a secret mission only the bravest children could decipher. By mid-afternoon, it was clear that Saturday's cookout had transformed into something beyond ordinary reality. People whispered to one another about the strange coincidences, the near-miraculous events that seemed to thread Maya's stories through the fabric of our backyard. And throughout it all, she watched with a smile, as if silently acknowledging that she had created a world that existed only because she said it could. When the sun began its slow descent, casting long, golden shadows across the yard, Maya's final story began. She leaned against the fence, speaking softly now, her voice carrying the weight of suspense. This one involved the ultimate barbecue competition, a secret, unspoken contest judged not by humans, but by the invisible entities of flavor themselves. According to her tale, these entities could taste joy, sorrow, courage, and curiosity, and they rewarded those who brought the most authentic spirit to their cooking. I listened, captivated, imagining invisible judges hovering above our grill, sampling sauces, inspecting ribs, nodding approvingly, or frowning in disappointment. Maya described their antics in painstaking detail, invisible forks piercing invisible ribs, silent applause that could still be felt in the chest, and the occasional invisible confetti explosion whenever someone's dish surpassed expectations. By the time she finished, the sky had turned a soft purple, stars beginning to twinkle faintly. The cookout wound down naturally, but the magic lingered. I looked at my sister and realized something profound. She didn't just tell stories. She built worlds, layered with humor, suspense, absurdity, and heart. And she had the power to make anyone who listened feel part of that world, even if only for a day. As guests left, thanking us for the meal and the entertainment, I sat quietly with Maya, watching the embers of the grill fade. "You know," I said, "you could probably turn this entire cookout into a novel. Or 10. She grinned. "Maybe I already have," she replied, eyes glinting with that same mischief I had learned to recognize so well. That night, as I went to bed, I thought not about the food, the laughter, or even the chaos of the day, but about the stories themselves. How one simple comment, "Can't wait for Saturday's cookout," had unfolded into a tapestry of adventure, humor, suspense, and impossible possibilities. And I realized that with Maya, ordinary life would never be ordinary again. Even in sleep, the echoes of her tales followed me, the bratwurst that defied logic, the haunted food truck that vanished without a trace, the magical cat, the gnomes, and the invisible flavor judges. Every mundane moment held the potential for magic, laughter, and wonder. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of the stories yet to come. The following Monday felt almost mundane in comparison, yet even the ordinary seemed charged with possibility after the events of the cookout. The smell of leftover barbecue still lingered faintly in the kitchen, mingling with the scent of fresh laundry drying near the windows. Maya was already at the table, thumbing through a small notebook that seemed far too old for someone as young as she was. "What's that?" I asked, curious despite myself. She didn't look up. "Oh, just some notes," she said casually. "You know, ideas for the next cookout stories." I raised an eyebrow. "Next cookout?" Maya grinned. "Yes. Of course there will be a next cookout. And this time, I think it might involve ghosts, a treasure map, and the world's most mischievous raccoon." I laughed, but there was a slight edge of apprehension in my chest. Somehow, after last Saturday, I knew not to underestimate her imagination. Over the next few days, the stories unfolded in layers. Even simple trips to the grocery store became adventures. Maya would point out ordinary items, a carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, a jar of pickles, and spin them into fantastical narratives. One morning, she claimed that the eggs had been smuggled in from a farm where the chickens were trained to perform synchronized dances, and that cracking one open could reveal a tiny, perfectly carved sculpture of some mythical creature. I rolled my eyes, but when she demonstrated a secret method for cracking an egg, the resulting yolk did resemble a vaguely dragon-like shape, and I couldn't help but laugh. She didn't stop at the grocery store. Each day became a canvas for her stories. A stray dog that wandered past our house became a legendary hero in her tales, known for rescuing entire villages from culinary disasters. A stray wind that blew through the streets carried messages, or perhaps invisible ingredients, essential for some hidden cooking contest only the most observant townsfolk could comprehend. Every detail of daily life transformed into a thread in her growing tapestry of stories. When Thursday came again, it brought with it our usual weekly dinner, but this time the anticipation was thicker. I noticed that Maya had a particularly gleam in her eyes, the kind that always preceded a story of epic proportions. She began by recounting an unexplained phenomenon. At a barbecue festival in a distant town, an entire tent of ribs, seasoned by a mysterious stranger, had reportedly vanished overnight. The locals claimed it wasn't theft but something far stranger. The ribs had somehow walked themselves to another town. "And the judge?" I asked, leaning in. "The judge?" Maya echoed, eyes glinting. "He swears the ribs returned only when the townspeople told the truth about their intentions for entering the contest. Dishonesty made them disappear again." Her stories layered on top of each other, building into a complex web of narrative threads. By the time she introduced a subplot involving a mysterious, half-hidden library of ancient recipes, I was completely captivated. According to Maya, this library appeared only to those who could taste the difference between ordinary barbecue and barbecue that was alive. The recipes were written in a code only decipherable when someone truly understood flavor, texture, and the intangible joy of sharing food with others. Somehow, she tied it all back to the upcoming cookout, making the ordinary backyard event feel like the nexus of magic, chaos, and culinary adventure. I found myself wondering whether the stories were purely imagination or if perhaps, in some invisible way, the magic had seeped into our lives. By the time dinner was over, the house was quiet again. I lingered in the living room, staring at the soft glow of the lamp as Maya sat cross-legged on the couch, sketching something in her notebook. I realized that her stories weren't just entertainment. They were a lens, a way of seeing the world where possibility and imagination could turn the smallest moment into something extraordinary. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the stories that had unfolded over the past week. The enchanted eggs, the dancing chickens, the invisible ingredients, the walking ribs. They were absurd, ridiculous, and yet strangely beautiful. I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that with someone like Maya, life was never just ordinary. Every glance, every smell, every sound held the potential for wonder, if you knew how to look. Even in sleep, the echoes continued. I dreamed of barbecue contests in ghost towns, of raccoons with tiny chef hats, of libraries that appeared only when the moonlight struck the garden gnome just right. And somewhere in that dreamscape, Maya's voice guided me, a constant thread weaving through the tapestry of absurdity and magic, reminding me that ordinary days could hold extraordinary stories if you were willing to see them. By Friday, I was practically vibrating with anticipation. Saturday's cookout felt inevitable, but also unknown, a blank page ready to be filled with the chaos, laughter, and impossible events that only Maya could conjure. And I knew that when it arrived, it would be something we, and everyone who attended, would remember forever.